They said humanity was weak, that we would be crushed before we even left our own planet. But when an alien empire demanded a bride for their princess, one human to save billions, everything changed. One man stepped forward, one human, and the galaxy would never underestimate us again. This is the story of how humans survive where no one thought we could. The Earth Council chamber hummed with tension. Screens projected the jagged silhouette of the Xylarian fleet hovering silently in orbit around Luna Base. Humanity had never faced an enemy like this. Beings whose technology had outpaced theirs by centuries, whose warships made even the largest human carriers look like fishing boats, and whose intentions, while stated as peaceful, exuded a cold inevitability. Captain Elias Kane shifted uneasily in his chair. At 32, he had faced death countless times in Earth's border skirmishes, but nothing had prepared him for diplomacy with a species that could disassemble a planet with a gesture. His dark eyes scanned the chamber, taking in the anxious faces of generals, politicians, and scientists. The air smelled faintly of recycled oxygen and fear. "The Xylarians demand a marriage alliance," Ambassador Lisette announced, her voice trembling slightly. "One human will marry their royal heir. Is the only way to avoid annihilation." A murmur rippled through the room. "Marriage," Kane barked, standing abruptly. "You mean to tell me they expect one of us to just marry an alien?" "That's..." "Exactly," Lisette said, cutting him off. Her tone held steel beneath the tremor. "We either agree, or we prepare for extinction." Kane sank back into his chair, jaw clenched. Humanity was at its knees, yet somehow the enormity of the proposal seemed almost surreal. He thought of Earth's wars, its politicians, its petty squabbles. None of that mattered anymore. The Xylarians were beyond politics, they were inevitability. The room fell silent as Lisette's hollow projection flickered. The figure of the Xylarian Princess Lyra materialized above the table, a vision of luminescent skin that shimmered like liquid silver, eyes the color of molten gold, and an aura that seemed to distort the air itself. "Greetings, humans," she said in a voice that resonated directly in their minds, bypassing the need for translation. "We offer peace. One of your kind shall become my partner. Together, our peoples will end this conflict. Refusal will result in your destruction." No one spoke. Kane felt the weight of her gaze like a gravitational pull, the kind that threatened to crush him if he faltered. Finally, he found his voice. "And why us? Why a human?" Lyra's gaze did not waver. "You are unpredictable. You are resilient. You are capable of things we cannot anticipate. This is why you must represent your species. If you fail, all of you will fail." The words hung in the chamber, like a guillotine waiting to fall. First contact. 3 days later, Kane's shuttle pierced the atmosphere of Xylaris Prime. The planet was nothing like Earth. Its skies glowed with auroras that danced eternally across violet horizons, and its cities were towers of glass-like metal that spiraled toward the clouds, alive with pulsating lights. Hovering transports glided silently among the towers, while massive creatures, Xylarians themselves, moved with deliberate elegance. Kane's heart pounded. He had been trained for combat, for diplomacy, for negotiation, but nothing prepared him for entering a world that felt more like a dream than a reality. He was met at the landing platform by a delegation of Xylarian guards, their forms tall and almost skeletal, their movements precise and unnervingly fluid. The tallest among them, presumably a commander, inclined his head. "Captain Kane, welcome to Xylaris Prime. The princess awaits." As Kane was escorted through the city, he marveled at the alien architecture. Buildings seemed to grow organically, twisting upward like crystalline trees. Streets shimmered with flowing energy instead of vehicles, and strange creatures of light skated across the air. Finally, they arrived at the Royal Palace, a structure that defied gravity, hovering several meters above the ground, supported by invisible forces. Kane felt a mixture of awe and intimidation. A soft chime echoed through the entrance hall, and the doors parted to reveal her, Princess Lyra. She was even more striking in person. Her skin glowed faintly, almost luminescent in the ambient light, and her hair floated as if underwater. Her eyes, molten gold, fixed on Kane with an intensity that made him swallow hard. "You are Captain Kane?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. "Yes, Princess Lyra," Kane replied, bowing slightly. "I am here to discuss the terms of peace." She studied him for a long moment. "Peace requires more than words, Captain. It requires trust. And trust begins with understanding." The proposal of coexistence. Over the following days, Kane was immersed in Xylarian culture. He was expected to learn not just their language, but their customs, their philosophies, and their unspoken social codes. Lyra accompanied him on every step, observing him silently, occasionally offering guidance. The palace was unlike anything on Earth. Rooms shimmered with energy, walls seemed alive, and the air vibrated faintly with latent power. Kane often caught himself staring at the ceilings, the floors, the creatures that glided through the halls, wondering how any human could survive here. And yet, survival became a form of art. Kane found that humans had a resilience the Xylarians could not predict. He improvised, adapted, and learned quickly, gaining Lyra's attention and occasionally her admiration. "You are remarkably adaptable," Lyra said one evening as they walked along a balcony overlooking the glowing city. "Most humans would falter within hours." Kane shrugged, trying to hide his growing discomfort at her praise. "We survive. That's what humans do." Her gaze softened slightly, though her eyes still held that intense golden glow. "Perhaps. Or perhaps your survival is something more profound, something worth studying." Their conversations were careful dances. Kane spoke of humanity's struggles, its history, its chaos, and its moments of brilliance. Lyra listened, sometimes questioning, sometimes silently contemplating. Slowly, he began to see the cracks in the seemingly perfect Xylarian society. Rigid hierarchies, suppressed emotions, and an over-reliance on calculated logic. First trial. On the 7th day, Kane faced his first test. A rogue faction of Xylarian nobles, opposed to the human alliance, attempted a sabotage mission within the palace. Kane, unfamiliar with the building's alien technology, used nothing but his wits and quick thinking to prevent disaster. Lyra arrived seconds after he had neutralized the threat, her expression unreadable. "You acted without hesitation. You made choices no Xylarian would dare." "This is human," she said, a faint trace of approval in her tone. "Sometimes instinct is better than calculation," Kane replied. For the first time, Lyra smiled, a small, fleeting thing that illuminated her alien features. "Perhaps this marriage will teach me more than I imagined." Kane, however, remained wary. The stakes were impossibly high. One misstep, one mistake, and it would not just be his life at risk, but all of humanity. As night fell over Xylaris Prime, Kane stood on the balcony, gazing at the alien stars. The weight of the future pressed heavily upon him. Humanity's survival depended on diplomacy, on adaptability, and on the unpredictable human spirit that even the most advanced alien civilization could not control. And somewhere across the palace, Lyra watched him silently, intrigued, challenged, and perhaps beginning to feel something entirely unexpected. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with political intrigue, cultural shocks, and war yet to come. But one truth was undeniable. Humanity had arrived on Xylaris Prime, and they had not arrived as prey. The corridors of the Xylarian palace seemed to stretch endlessly, as if the building itself were alive, observing every visitor with a patience only an ancient intelligence could possess. Captain Elias Kane walked alongside Princess Lyra, feeling acutely aware of every sound his boots made on the iridescent floor, every breath he took in the dense, humming air. Today marked the formal discussion of the marriage pact. It was to be more than ceremonial. It was to cement the alliance, or perhaps silently, to test humanity's resolve. Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. "You understand the gravity of this, Captain Kane?" she asked, her molten gold eyes fixed on his. "I do," he said, though his words fell hollow. Could anyone ever truly understand what it meant to bind yourself, your life, your body, your species, to another in the hope of survival? Lyra's expression softened, and for a moment, Kane saw the glimmer of something human in her alien features. "Good. You will need that understanding. What comes next will challenge everything you believe about yourself." The ceremony of consent. The marriage ceremony on Xylaris was unlike anything Kane had imagined. It was not just a legal act, nor a religious ritual, but a weaving of identities, a binding of two minds and souls into a fragile but powerful partnership. Kane stepped into the chamber, an enormous hall of translucent crystal and floating light. At its center hovered a pool of energy that pulsed like a living heartbeat. Lyra waited at the edge, her form glowing softly. Surrounding them were the Xylarian Council, regal, immaculately poised, and utterly silent. "You may speak your consent," the High Chancellor intoned, his voice resonating directly in Kane's mind. Kane's heart thumped violently. "I agree," he said aloud. The words felt alien in his mouth, almost like a lie. But they were the truth, the only truth that would save billions of lives. Lyra's voice was steady, almost musical. I consent. The pool of energy reacted instantly, sending ripples across the hall. Kane felt a tug at the very core of his being, a subtle shift in perception, as if the Xylarian bond had already begun to link their minds. For the first time, he realized this marriage was more than symbolic. It was a living, breathing connection. Culture shock. The first weeks on Xylaris Prime were an education in endurance. Kane was thrust into a world where instinct, emotion, and improvisation, human traits that had saved his life countless times, were considered primitive at best and dangerous at worst. Meals were a challenge. Xylarian food existed in forms Kane could barely recognize. Iridescent liquids that shifted flavor with each sip, crystalline fruits that resonated when touched, and ambient energy fields that altered perception temporarily. He learned quickly to rely on his own instincts to survive the strange, beautiful, and occasionally disorienting cuisine. Your species eats with such irregularity, Lyra observed one evening. Kane had refused a translucent dish that hummed faintly, choosing instead to eat raw, simple nutrient pods. Most humans would not have the discipline to adapt to our sustenance. I eat to survive, Kane replied, not to impress anyone. Lyra's lips curved in a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perhaps that is why you live. Even social rituals were tests of nerve. Kane was expected to participate in games of intellect that were equal parts combat simulation and philosophy, perform dances that altered neural patterns, and engage in negotiations where every gesture, blink, and thought carried meaning. Each failure brought whispers and sideways glances, yet Kane endured, learning, observing, and slowly earning the respect of the court. Political intrigue. Not all Xylarians welcomed the alliance. A faction of nobles, known as the Shard Council, saw the human marriage as an abomination. They whispered in dark corners, sowing doubt and tension. You are a dangerous anomaly, one of them said to Kane in a corridor, voice dripping with contempt. Your kind has no place here. The princess will see the folly soon. Kane did not flinch. Perhaps, he said, but until she does, millions of humans live because of me. Your doubts won't change that. Lyra, observing the confrontation from a balcony above, seemed intrigued. She had learned to respect Kane's courage, not just physical bravery, but moral fortitude. The human's unpredictable nature was slowly revealing itself to her in ways that unsettled the court. Moments of connection. Even amidst the political pressure, Kane and Lyra began to find moments of genuine connection. They would walk through the luminous gardens of the palace, where plants emitted faint light and flowers sang in tones humans could barely hear. You remind me of the stars, Lyra said quietly one evening, watching Kane study a particularly stubborn puzzle of alien logic. Your mind moves in patterns we cannot predict, yet there is elegance in it. Kane laughed softly, a sound that seemed almost musical against the ethereal hum of Xylaris. I just survive, he said. You make it sound like a dance. Perhaps it is a dance, she replied, her gaze steady, but one that might save both our species. It was in these quiet moments that Kane began to see Lyra not just as an alien ruler or political partner, but as a person with fears, hopes, and curiosities, an intelligence equal to his own, tempered by a perspective shaped over millennia. First crisis. A week after the ceremony, the first true crisis struck. A Xylarian warship, part of a rogue fleet rejecting the human alliance, approached the palace undetected. Alarm sirens vibrated through the floating halls. Kane, relying on instinct, recognized a weakness in the ship's approach patterns. Lyra, follow my lead, he commanded, more to himself than anyone else. We need to seal the energy conduits and reroute the defensive matrix. Lyra's eyes widened, but she trusted him. Together, they coordinated with palace engineers, humans and Xylarians working in tense synchrony. Kane's improvisation, his ability to anticipate and react without reliance on pre-programmed calculations, saved the palace from catastrophe. Afterward, Lyra approached him. You acted without hesitation, and yet with precision. Humans are remarkable. Kane only shook his head. We survive. That's all we know. Perhaps, she said softly, or perhaps your survival is something more profound. It was a moment that neither could define. Respect mingled with curiosity, curiosity with fascination. The bond, initially political, began to shift toward something neither dared to name. As the days turned into weeks, Kane adapted to Xylarian life with increasing ease. He learned the subtle nuances of their communication, mastered some of their intellectual games, and discovered ways to navigate court politics without angering the Shard Council. Lyra, in turn, began to see humans differently. They were messy, emotional, and unpredictable, but they were also resilient, innovative, and fiercely loyal. She began to understand why the Xylarian elders had proposed marriage. Humanity's traits were exactly what was needed to survive the galaxy's growing threats. "You have changed my perspective," she admitted one night, as they gazed at the twin moons of Xylaris from the palace balcony. "I believe your kind would be inadequate. I see now that you are not. You are capable." "And you?" Kane asked quietly. "Have you changed?" Lyra's eyes glimmered in the starlight. "Perhaps. You may yet teach me more than I have learned in millennia." The marriage pact was no longer merely a political strategy. It had begun to forge a bridge between two species, two minds, two hearts. Kane had earned his place not by bloodline or title, but by human ingenuity, courage, and resilience. Lyra had begun to see beyond the perfection of her civilization, glimpsing the power in imperfection, the chaotic brilliance of humanity. But shadows lingered. The Shard Council plotted, rogue factions gathered, and the universe beyond Xylaris Prime was growing restless. Kane and Lyra had won the first battles of diplomacy and trust, but the war for true peace was only beginning. As Kane stood once more on the balcony, looking over the glowing alien city, he understood the truth. Survival had always been the human way, but now it was also the human way to inspire, to teach, and perhaps to love. The days on Xylaris Prime had begun to blur into a rhythm that was both alien and strangely familiar to Captain Elias Kane. The palace, with its pulsating walls of light and whispering corridors, no longer felt entirely hostile. He had adapted to the routines, the challenges, and the subtle expectations of Xylarian society. Yet every day brought new surprises, sometimes tests, sometimes lessons, and sometimes fleeting moments that reminded him that even in this perfect, calculated world, he was still human. Princess Lyra had grown accustomed to his presence in ways she herself did not entirely understand. She observed him constantly, noting his peculiar ways, the slight impatience with ceremonial rituals, the pragmatic approach to problem-solving, the stubborn insistence on human logic in a society that prized perfection above all else. These traits, once dismissed as primitive, had begun to fascinate her. The Council of Minds. One morning, Kane was summoned to the Hall of Minds, a chamber where the Xylarian Council convened to debate the future of the Alliance. The room was vast, circular, and impossibly elegant, with walls that shimmered with abstract representations of thought itself. Each council member appeared as a humanoid silhouette overlaid with fractal patterns of light, their minds radiating intelligence and authority. "You will speak human," said Lyra, standing beside him. "Your voice carries weight here now. Do not underestimate it." Kane swallowed. He had faced armies, threats, and disasters, but standing in front of the Xylarian Council was an entirely different challenge. "I understand," he said, and stepped forward. The discussion was tense. Some council members opposed the human alliance, citing centuries of difference and the perceived fragility of human society. Others, cautiously intrigued, suggested that humans' unpredictability could be advantageous in defense strategy. Kane spoke carefully, drawing on both logic and emotion, explaining humanity's adaptability, ingenuity, and capacity for collaboration. He recounted examples from Earth's history. Wars survived against overwhelming odds, civilizations rebuilt after collapse, and the ingenuity that had allowed humans to flourish despite seemingly impossible challenges. The council listened, some skeptically, some fascinated. Lyra watched silently, her expression unreadable, until Kane finished. "I do not promise perfection," he said. "I promise survival, ingenuity, and loyalty. If we work together, we can achieve something your calculations alone cannot." For the first time in centuries, a ripple of intrigue passed through the council. Whispers of respect, and perhaps fear, spread among them. Lyra's eyes met Kane's, and she allowed herself a small, approving nod. Shared lessons. Outside the council chambers, Kane and Lyra spent hours together, exploring the city and sharing knowledge. Kane taught Lyra about Earth's imperfections, the beauty of chaos, the creativity born from necessity, the subtle art of improvisation. "You see," Kane said one evening as they walked through a garden that shimmered in hues of violet and gold, "humans thrive because we adapt. We don't always follow the rules, but we find ways to survive and grow. That's why we're dangerous, because you can never fully predict us. Lyra considered his words carefully. Your unpredictability, it unsettles me. Yet I cannot deny its effectiveness. She paused, glancing at a floating flower whose petals emitted musical tones. Perhaps humans are more evolved in ways we do not measure. Kane smiled faintly. Evolution isn't always about perfection. Sometimes it's about resilience, curiosity, and courage. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, Kane sensed vulnerability behind the alien perfection. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it humanized her. A test of ingenuity. The bond between them was tested when the palace faced a threat unlike any before. A rogue Xylarian scientist had developed a device capable of destabilizing the city's energy matrix. The council had failed to detect it, relying too heavily on their advanced systems and calculated probabilities. Kane, however, noticed anomalies in the energy patterns during routine walks through the palace. Drawing on intuition, observation, and a willingness to take risks, tools humans often relied upon, he traced the disruption to a hidden laboratory. Lyra followed him closely, astonished by his methodology. You are not bound by protocol, she whispered, her voice tinged with admiration. You see possibilities that our calculations cannot account for. Together, they neutralized the threat. Kane improvised a sequence of overrides using alien technology he barely understood, while Lyra manipulated the palace's energy flow in ways that complemented his strategy. The rogue scientist was contained, and the crisis averted. The council, witnessing the aftermath, murmured in awe. Kane had done what centuries of Xylarian intelligence had not. He had anticipated the unexpected. You see, Kane said to Lyra afterward, humans thrive in uncertainty. We don't wait for perfection, we make it happen. Lyra studied him thoughtfully. Perhaps this is why the elders proposed the alliance. Your species possesses strengths we cannot quantify, but now, I understand why it is valuable. Moments of vulnerability. Amid political maneuvers and crises, moments of vulnerability drew Kane and Lyra closer. One evening, as they sat beneath the twin moons of Xylaris, Kane shared stories of Earth, its oceans, deserts, forests, and mountains, its triumphs and tragedies, its people's resilience in the face of catastrophe. Lyra listened in silence, absorbing every detail. Your world, it is chaotic, flawed, yet beautiful, she said softly. I can see why humans endure. You do not rely on certainty. You rely on courage, ingenuity, and spirit. Kane looked at her, realizing that for the first time, he was seeing not just an alien ruler, but an individual capable of growth, empathy, and connection. And you, he said quietly, you've taught me that even perfection can learn. Even a mind that calculates everything can be surprised. For a fleeting moment, the distance between human and alien seemed to vanish. They were simply two beings learning from one another, challenged by the universe, bound by circumstance, and perhaps something more. The Council's recognition. Weeks later, Kane and Lyra returned to the Hall of Minds. This time, the Council was ready to recognize not just Kane's value as a political symbol, but his influence as a catalyst for understanding between species. You have shown that humans are capable of much more than we imagined, the High Chancellor intoned. Their intuition, creativity, and adaptability are remarkable. Perhaps we underestimated them. Lyra's eyes, radiant and intense, met Kane's across the chamber. There was pride there, respect, and an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. Kane, in turn, felt a sense of purpose he had never known, not just as a captain or diplomat, but as a human capable of shaping the fate of an entire civilization. Shadows linger. Even as progress was made, shadows remained. The Shard Council continued to whisper, factions on other planets began questioning the alliance, and unknown threats in the galaxy hinted at dangers yet to come. Kane and Lyra were learning to navigate trust, loyalty, and affection, but they were also preparing for the trials that lay ahead. Lyra, standing on a balcony overlooking the glowing city, whispered to Kane, "You have changed my world. But we are only beginning. The universe beyond Xylaris is vast and dangerous. Will humanity be ready?" Kane's hand brushed hers, tentative yet certain. "We survive," he said, echoing the mantra that had carried him through countless battles. "And when humans survive, we thrive." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself a faint, hopeful smile. Perhaps together, they could not only survive, but change the course of history itself. The marriage pact had evolved from a mere political strategy into a partnership rooted in respect, understanding, and shared purpose. Kane had proven that human ingenuity and adaptability could not only survive in an alien world, but thrive. Lyra had discovered that even perfection could learn, adapt, and be challenged. Yet the galaxy was unforgiving. Rogue factions stirred, alien politics churned, and the shadow of war loomed ever closer. Kane and Lyra knew that their bond, tested by culture, conflict, and diplomacy, would soon face challenges that could either unite their worlds or destroy them both. And somewhere deep in the pulse of Xylarian Prime, the first stirrings of an interstellar crisis began to take shape, a test that would demand not just human resilience, but the unpredictable brilliance that made humanity unstoppable. The calm of Xylarian Prime was shattered in the early hours of the third moon cycle. Alarm sirens tore through the palace, resonating with the very fabric of the floating city. Shard Council operatives had staged a coordinated assault, striking multiple strategic points simultaneously. Ships descended from orbit with the precision of a predator, while saboteurs infiltrated key power conduits within the city. Captain Elias Kane leapt from his quarters, immediately assessing the chaos. Years of battlefield experience had taught him one thing: panic was the enemy. And today, humanity's survival depended on thinking faster than a species that prided itself on perfection. First skirmishes. Status report. Kane barked as he sprinted through a corridor, energy shielding humming to life around him. A young Xylarian technician reported, multiple breaches in the outer defense grid, Captain. Enemy forces bypassed automated protocols. Losses are already critical. Kane's eyes narrowed. Automated protocols aren't enough. Humans survive because we improvise. Give me a control node and a bypass, now. Within moments, Kane was interfacing with alien technology he barely understood. To the Xylarians, it seemed reckless. He was tapping into systems with calculated probabilities of catastrophic failure. But to Kane, it was instinct, adaptation, and ingenuity, tools that humans wielded naturally. He rerouted power through auxiliary conduits, creating a feedback loop that disabled enemy ships momentarily. The attackers' formations faltered, buying precious time for Xylarian forces to respond. Lyra arrived at his side, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "You are audacious," she said, her voice carrying the resonance of thought itself. No Xylarian would attempt such a maneuver. Kane did not answer. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead, anticipating enemy movements and recalibrating defenses in real time. The human factor. As the battle escalated, Kane realized that human unpredictability was the greatest weapon at their disposal. The Xylarian fleets were formidable, but they relied on algorithms and logic. Humans, however, could exploit chaos. He orchestrated a series of counterattacks using asymmetric tactics. Small teams of human engineers infiltrated enemy ships, planting disruptive devices. Human pilots executed maneuvers that no alien program could predict, and Kane himself coordinated defensive arrays with rapid improvisation. Lyra observed all of this, her perception shifting. Humans are not weaker, she murmured to herself. They are extraordinary. By the time the first wave of the assault was repelled, Kane's strategies had inflicted unexpected losses on the attackers, demonstrating a brilliance that Xylarian calculations could not anticipate. Rogue factions and political turmoil. The Shard Council's betrayal ran deeper than anyone suspected. They had allied with extremist factions across neighboring systems, seeking to dismantle the alliance and ensure human extinction. During a council session convened in the Hall of Minds, Kane faced not only political resistance, but open hostility. "You place our civilization at risk," one elder hissed. "Your human influence weakens our strategies." Kane's voice was calm but firm. "It is not weakness. It is survival. Humans thrive in uncertainty, and that is why we are here. To anticipate the unexpected, to act where algorithms fail, and to preserve life when logic alone cannot." Lyra's eyes flared with quiet intensity. "He is correct," she said. "Human ingenuity is saving lives. Underestimating it would be catastrophic." For the first time, the Council was forced to recognize that human unpredictability was not a liability, but a critical advantage. Human leadership in battle. The next phase of the conflict took to the skies. Kane led a coalition of human and Xylarian pilots against a rogue fleet in orbit above Xylarian Prime. Human intuition guided maneuvers that confounded the enemy, while Lyra coordinated with planetary defenses, relying on Kane's improvisation to maximize efficiency. One critical moment arrived when a massive rogue dreadnought threatened to breach the planetary shield. Kane's plan was audacious. Using a combination of human reflex, Xylarian technology, and unpredictable tactics, he directed a small strike team to disable the dreadnought's energy core from within. It worked. The dreadnought's systems collapsed, and the rogue fleet was thrown into disarray. The remaining forces retreated, their carefully calculated strategies undone by the unpredictability of human action. After the battle, Kane returned to the palace, exhausted but alive. Lyra met him on the balcony overlooking the glowing city, the twin moons reflecting in her molten gold eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. "Not just with strength, but with vision, creativity, and courage." Kane shook his head. "Humans survive. That's all. But I didn't do it alone." She studied him, and for the first time, Kane sensed her vulnerability. "You understand us," she said softly, "in ways no one else could. Perhaps you understand me." The weight of the galaxy's future pressed down on them, but in that quiet moment, the human and the alien were simply two beings, bonded by circumstance, respect, and a growing, unspoken connection. The cost of victory. The victory was not without cost. Thousands of Xylarian soldiers were lost, and the palace bore the scars of sabotage. Kane and Lyra moved among the wounded, offering comfort, guidance, and leadership. Humans and Xylarian allies began to see the potential of their partnership, not merely survival, but a collaboration that could overcome even the most impossible odds. Yet the threat was far from over. Intelligence reports indicated that the Shard Council's influence extended beyond Xylaris Prime. Entire systems were being mobilized for a campaign to destroy humanity before the Alliance could consolidate power. Kane understood the stakes. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly to Lyra. "If we fail, everything dies. But if we succeed, we can change the galaxy." Lyra nodded, her gaze steady. "Then we succeed. Together." Recognition of humanity. The High Chancellor formally acknowledged Kane's contributions during a council ceremony. Human ingenuity, courage, and adaptability have preserved Xylaris Prime. This species, once underestimated, has proven invaluable. We must integrate them fully into our strategies, lest we face destruction ourselves. Lyra stood beside Kane, her hand brushing his briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps something deeper. Kane felt a warmth he could not entirely name. The marriage pact had evolved beyond politics. It had become a true partnership of minds, hearts, and species, preparing for the future. As Xylaris Prime recovered from the initial assault, Kane and Lyra focused on consolidating the alliance. Human creativity and Xylarian technology began to merge, creating strategies, infrastructure, and systems that neither species could have developed alone. But the shadows lingered. Rogue factions remained, and whispers of rebellion spread across neighboring star systems. The galaxy beyond Xylaris Prime was vast and unforgiving. Kane stood on the balcony once more, gazing at the stars. "The war isn't over," he said. "But humanity, we never back down. We adapt, we survive, and we fight for those we care about." Lyra's hand found his, and this time, Kane did not flinch. "Then we fight together," she said softly. "Not just for survival, but for a future worth living." The Human-Alien Alliance had faced its first major trial and emerged victorious, but at great cost. Kane had demonstrated the unpredictable brilliance of humanity, reshaping Xylarian perceptions and cementing his role as a key figure in the galaxy's unfolding history. Lyra had begun to see humanity not as fragile or inferior, but as equal, capable, and indispensable. The marriage pact, initially a political strategy, had evolved into a true bond forged in fire, intellect, and shared purpose. Yet the universe was vast, and danger still lurked. Kane and Lyra knew that the challenges ahead would test their alliance, their courage, and their growing connection in ways neither could predict. And somewhere in the shadowed expanse of space, the Shard Council and their allies were already planning their next move, unaware that the unpredictable force of humanity was ready to meet them head-on. The void of space beyond Xylaris Prime shimmered with tension. Dozens of rogue fleets, loyal to the Shard Council, converged on the planet like a storm threatening to consume everything. Starships, elegant yet lethal, moved in perfect formation, their weapon systems primed to annihilate the city below. The Shard Council's ambition had gone beyond political manipulation. They sought complete domination, and humanity stood squarely in their path. Captain Elias Kane, standing on the command deck of the flagship Horizon, surveyed the tactical displays. Human engineers and Xylarian pilots worked in tandem, integrating intuition with precision. Every move, every countermeasure, depended on humans' unpredictable brilliance and Xylarian technology's calculated efficiency. Beside him, Princess Lyra's presence radiated calm authority. Her eyes, molten gold, reflected both concern and unwavering trust. "We cannot allow them to breach the planetary defenses," she said softly. "This war will decide more than territory. It will define the future of our species." Kane nodded. "Then we fight smart, fast, and unpredictable. Humanity doesn't survive by following the rules. We survive by rewriting them in real time." The first wave. The battle began with blinding ferocity. Rogue dreadnoughts unleashed energy torrents that tore through orbital defenses, while squads of agile attack ships skirmished with Xylarian fighters. Humans adapted instantly, executing maneuvers that confounded the enemy and exploited weaknesses no Xylarian calculation could anticipate. Kane directed human and Xylarian strike teams, combining instincts with technology in ways that even Lyra had not foreseen. Small squads infiltrated rogue ships, disabling cores from within. Pilots executed unpredictable loops and evasive maneuvers that made algorithms fail. Chaos, the enemy's greatest fear, became humanity's greatest weapon. Lyra watched, mingling with admiration. "Your species, you do not just survive. You dominate in ways we cannot measure." Kane's gaze did not waver from the battle screens. "We fight because we must. But we win because we can think beyond limits." The turning point. The enemy's flagship, Oblivion, emerged from the shadows, a colossal vessel bristling with weapons capable of leveling Xylaris Prime. The fleet faltered, uncertain how to approach the threat. Kane devised a plan audacious enough to be insane. He gathered a small human strike team aboard Horizon and coordinated a direct assault on Oblivion's core. The Xylarians hesitated, wary of risk, but Kane's confidence and their reliance on his human intuition pushed them forward. "Trust me," he said to Lyra as they prepared for departure. "If we fail together. But if we succeed, everything changes." Lyra's golden eyes softened. "I trust you, Elias. You have already changed my world. Perhaps you can change the galaxy." The assault. The strike team infiltrated Oblivion through a weak point Kane had identified using human intuition rather than calculation. Within the enemy vessel, chaos reigned. Alien crews, trained for precision, were unprepared for unpredictable human tactics. Kane directed the team with calm authority, improvising solutions to problems no algorithm could predict. They reached the core chamber. Kane's hands moved over the alien controls, bypassing security protocols and inserting a sequence designed to destabilize the vessel's energy flow. The core began to overload. Energy surged, threatening to engulf them. "Now, Lyra." Kane shouted through comlink. Lyra manipulated planetary defenses from Xylaris Prime, channeling a pulse of energy that contained the chain reaction long enough for the strike team to escape. The dreadnought erupted in a spectacular explosion, its systems annihilated, and the rogue fleet's morale shattered. The remaining enemy forces, leaderless and confused, retreated into the void. Xylaris Prime was saved, its people alive, and humanity's ingenuity had become the decisive factor in victory. The High Chancellor addressed the Council. "Today, a human has proven that survival is not merely about strength or calculation. It is about adaptability, courage, and the unpredictable brilliance of your species. We must recognize humanity as equals, not subjects or pawns." Lyra stood beside Kane, her hand brushing his briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in fire. "You have shown me what I could not understand before," she said. "Humans are extraordinary. Your species is not inferior. It is indispensable." Kane smiled faintly. "We just survive," he said. "But sometimes surviving is enough to change everything." Xylaris Prime began the slow process of rebuilding. The marriage pact, initially a political necessity, had evolved into a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. Humans and Xylarians collaborated in ways neither species could have imagined. Infrastructure was rebuilt, defenses improved, and cultural exchanges flourished. Lyra and Kane's bond deepened. They shared quiet moments in the palace gardens, under alien moons, and amid glowing flora that pulsed with soft light. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and a growing warmth that transcended politics. "You've changed my life, Elias," Lyra said one evening, her golden eyes reflecting the twin moons. "Not because of power or victory, but because you taught me to see beyond calculation." Kane took her hand, steady and certain. "And you've taught me that even perfection can learn. Together, we can survive anything." A legacy of humanity. The galaxy took notice. Tales of human bravery, ingenuity, and adaptability spread across star systems. Where Xylarians had relied on algorithms and precision, humans introduced unpredictability, creativity, and bold improvisation. It became clear that humans were not a fragile species, they were a force capable of shaping events far beyond their numbers. In councils and strategy rooms across allied planets, Xylarian leaders began consulting humans not as subordinates, but as equals. Kane's example became a symbol. One human, standing against impossible odds, had changed the course of history. The final challenge. Even as peace settled over Xylaris Prime, whispers of new threats emerged from distant galaxies. Kane and Lyra knew their victory was only the beginning. The universe was vast, and countless challenges awaited. But they faced the future together, humans and Xylarians, bonded by trust, ingenuity, and a shared vision of survival and prosperity. On the palace balcony, Kane gazed at the horizon, where stars sparkled like shards of light in the infinite dark. Lyra's hand found his, and they stood in silence. "The universe may challenge us again," Kane said softly. "But humanity, we never surrender. We adapt, we survive, and we fight for what matters." Lyra smiled, her expression warm and certain. "Then let us face it together. For our worlds, for our people, and for the future." The stars above Xylaris Prime shimmered as if acknowledging the triumph below. Humanity had arrived, not as a fragile species to be dominated, but as a force capable of reshaping the galaxy. Their ingenuity, unpredictability, and courage had rewritten the rules of interstellar politics and war. Kane and Lyra, bound by love, respect, and shared purpose, looked toward the horizon. The marriage pact had begun as a political maneuver, but had become the foundation of an alliance that would endure for generations. As the twin moons rose, bathing the palace gardens in silver light, Kane whispered, "We survived, and now we thrive." Lyra's hand tightened in his. "Yes, Elias. Together, we will shape the future." The galaxy had witnessed the rise of humanity's brilliance. And in the hearts of those who had once doubted them, a new truth settled. Humans were not just survivors, they were creators, leaders, and an unstoppable force in the vast cosmos. The war was over. The bond was eternal. And the legend of the human bride of Xylaris and the human captain who defied the stars had only just begun.